It is just past dawn. The garden is quiet except for the sound of a small bird landing on the lip of your bird bath, a warbler, barely larger than your thumb, its feathers still damp from the night. You have seen birds like this before. They pass through in autumn, stay a few weeks, vanish. You have probably never thought much about where they come from. Most people don't. They are just part of the seasonal rhythm, a small visitor, a brief song, and then gone. But if you could attach a thread to that warbler and watch where it went, north, across the sea, through a corridor of atmosphere 6 kilometers above the ocean, and if you followed that thread all the way back to where it began, you would find yourself standing in a forest you have never visited, in a country you might not have expected, looking at a nest smaller than a cupped hand. The warbler you are watching has flown more than 6,000 miles to be in your garden this morning. And scientists, after decades of study, still cannot fully explain how it knew to come here. This is not a story about instinct in the vague, comfortable sense. Not a metaphor. Not a feeling. What ornithologists have documented in migratory birds is a physical navigation system of staggering precision, one that uses tools we do not fully understand, operating through mechanisms we have not completely mapped. The research is real. The papers are peer-reviewed. The mystery inside them is genuine. Researchers at institutions including Lund University, the Max Planck Institute for Ornithology, and Cornell Lab of Ornithology have spent careers on this. They have attached geolocators to birds weighing less than 10 grams. They have tracked individual animals across hemispheres. They have isolated them in magnetic chambers and watched their behavior change in ways that should not be possible. The data is extraordinary. What the data cannot yet tell us, completely, is how. If you have ever watched a small bird land in your yard on a gray October morning, stay with me. By the end of this video, that moment will feel entirely different. Subscribe to this channel if you want to keep following science that has not settled yet. And stay until the final section, because what happens to the migratory brain in the weeks before departure is something most people have never heard of, and once you hear it, you will not forget it. Most people assume that migratory birds learn their routes the way most animals learn things, by following others, by being shown. A young bird travels south behind its parents, memorizes the landmarks, and repeats the journey the following year. This is a reasonable assumption. It is mostly wrong. Research published in the journal Nature demonstrated that many long-distance migratory songbirds, including blackpoll warblers and European garden warblers, migrate successfully on their first journey entirely alone, without any experienced guide. First-year birds depart on a heading that is genetically encoded, not taught. The direction, the approximate distance, even the timing of when to stop, all of it is present in the bird before it has ever left the nest. Researchers confirm this by hand-raising birds in isolation, removing any possibility of social learning. Those birds still oriented correctly. They still knew when to leave. What makes this genuinely strange is this: if the route is genetic, something in the genome must encode not just a direction, but a sense of distance, a capacity to know when to turn. How natural selection shaped a genome to store a navigational program across thousands of miles of ocean remains, mechanistically, an open question. Once we know the route is partly innate, the next question is obvious: how does the bird find its bearing? Most people assume it uses the sun, the stars, landmarks, the same things a human navigator would use. And birds do use all of those. But they also use something else. In 1972, a biologist named Wolfgang Wiltschko demonstrated that European robins could orient themselves using Earth's magnetic field. The birds were placed in an artificial magnetic field with no other directional cues. They still oriented. When the field was reversed, they oriented in the opposite direction. Subsequent work, including research from the universities of Oldenburg and Exeter, has since confirmed the presence of cryptochrome proteins in birds' eyes, proteins that are sensitive to the planet's magnetic field and appear to work through a quantum mechanical process called radical pair formation. The bird may, in some sense, see magnetism as a visual overlay. But this is where it gets complicated. The exact cellular mechanism, how the quantum signal is translated into a neural signal, how the brain interprets it as directional information, is not yet fully resolved. We know the receptor exists. We do not completely understand the circuit it connects to. What makes this genuinely strange is this: there is serious scientific debate about whether what birds are doing involves quantum coherence, a phenomenon usually associated with laboratory physics, not living neurons in a flying animal. The possibility has not been ruled out. It has not been confirmed either. Assume the bird has its bearing. The next challenge is the crossing itself. Many migratory songbirds, including blackpoll warblers in North America, cross the open Atlantic Ocean non-stop. No land. No landmarks. No place to stop. Researchers at the University of Massachusetts, using geolocators recovered from returning birds, tracked blackpoll warblers on a non-stop oceanic crossing averaging between 2.5 and 3 days. During that crossing, the birds do not land. They do not sleep, at least not in any way we would recognize as sleep. Here is the scale moment: a blackpoll warbler weighs approximately 12 grams at departure, roughly the weight of 4 paperclips. By the time it reaches South America, it may have burned half its body mass as fuel. In the 48 to 72 hours of that crossing, it will have flapped its wings an estimated 1 million times. 1 million wing beats. 12 grams. No rest. What makes this genuinely strange is this: the birds appear to track and compensate for wind drift during the crossing, making real-time heading corrections over open ocean with no landmarks visible in any direction. How they assess drift, how they know they have been pushed off course when there is nothing to fix on, is not fully understood. There is one more layer to the navigation puzzle, and it concerns something that happens before the bird ever leaves. In the weeks before migration, many songbird species undergo a state called Zugunruhe, a German word meaning, roughly, migratory restlessness. The bird becomes hyperactive at night, oriented in its departure direction, unable to settle. But Zugunruhe is not just behavioral. It is neurological. Research from the Lund University group and from teams working with garden warblers has shown that the migratory brain physically changes in the weeks before departure. The hippocampus, the region associated with spatial memory and navigation, measurably enlarges in preparation for migration, and then partially shrinks again after arrival. The bird's brain is literally reshaping itself for the journey. Additionally, the bird's eyes appear to become more sensitive to magnetic information during this period. The cryptochrome proteins shift in density and distribution. The system tunes itself. What makes this genuinely strange is this: the hippocampal expansion is not simply the result of increased use, it precedes the journey. Something in the bird's internal calendar triggers a neurological rebuild weeks before it encounters a single navigational challenge. The signal that starts this process, what exactly triggers the hippocampus to begin growing, is not yet fully identified. Finally, consider what happens at the other end: arrival. Long-distance migrants do not just land somewhere in the general vicinity of their destination. Individual birds return to the same field, the same woodland patch, sometimes the same bush, year after a round trip of 12,000 miles. A study tracking ospreys with GPS transmitters found individuals returning to nest sites within meters of the previous year's location after complete circuits of Africa and back. Similar site fidelity has been documented in warblers, flycatchers, and shorebirds. The precision is not approximate. It is specific enough that researchers can use it to monitor habitat loss. If a bird fails to return to an exact site, the site itself may have changed. But here is what the research has not resolved: how a bird triangulates a pinpoint location after a journey of that length, without recalibration, remains mechanistically unclear. The magnetic map hypothesis, that birds build a grid map from magnetic gradients during early life, remains a working theory, not a confirmed mechanism. The sensory data exists. The neural computation that turns it into a precise address does not yet have a complete explanation. What makes this genuinely strange is this: the bird in your yard may have returned to within 50 meters of that exact patch of garden, after 6,000 miles, using a system that science has not yet fully drawn. It is still early morning. The warbler is still on the edge of the birdbath. It dips its head once, shakes the water from its wings, and considers the garden with one eye. Nothing about the scene has changed. The light is the same. The bird is the same bird, small, feathered, unreadable. But you know now what that bird is carrying inside it: a set of instruments that can read the planet's magnetic field, possibly through a quantum process, a genetically encoded map that knows both direction and distance, a brain that restructured itself in the weeks before departure, and a precision address for this exact patch of ground, filed somewhere in its hippocampus after a crossing of the open Atlantic on a dozen grams of stored fat. It is not a spiritual feeling, standing there. It is something quieter and stranger than that. It is the feeling of watching something whose inner workings have been studied for decades by some of the best-equipped research teams on the planet, and still haven't been fully mapped. The warbler tips its head again. Then it is gone. If you have ever noticed a migratory bird returning to your yard, the same species, the same corner of the garden, year after year, I would genuinely like to know, how many seasons have you been watching it come back, and has it ever arrived to a spot that no longer looked the way it did the year before? I read every comment.